Last week we discussed the fact that as sons and daughters of God, we are supposed to be people who make peace. It is not an optional part of our walk with Christ. It is a fundamental aspect of Jesus' kingdom. So fundamental that Jesus puts it towards the beginning of his Sermon on the Mount, one of his inaugural sermons of his ministry. It is just that important. We looked at some other passages that showed how Jesus, his ministry was to reconcile us to himself, to reconcile all nations, every language and tribe and nation to himself. And that creates peace. And we are to join him in that task. So Jesus came to bring peace between sinners and God, between nations and ethnicities, as we unite around the truth of the gospel. Now, we are supposed to bring peace between one another when there is conflict and disputes, and we can even step in other contexts and use the skills that God has given to us to help bring peace where there is some kind of a conflict. And we recognize the fact that making peace is not easy, and sometimes it is not possible because of factors outside of our control. So far it is up to you, live at peace with all men. Sometimes other people are not willing to make peace. But regardless, it is something that each and every one of us are supposed to be working towards. And one of the factors that makes it really difficult, Dave, listen, one of the factors that makes it really difficult for us to make peace is that we don't listen to each other. See, if I pick on somebody, it's the proof point. We don't listen to each other, okay? So, and I think today's day and age, we have really lost the art and the skill of listening. Especially when you watch the news, whether it's Fox News or CNN, or you jump on Facebook and you see people posting their status updates. We don't communicate, we don't talk, we don't listen. We just spout what's off on our brains, and we don't listen to what anybody else has to say. That we throw bullet points, we throw talking points, we say, okay, this is my political party, so these are the things I've been spoon-fed to say, and we don't listen. We just talk over each other. If Dave starts to talk, and I interrupt Dave, and he's still talking, and I'm talking, and when you watch the news, they have panelists come on from different perspectives, and you can't hear a word they're saying because they're talking over each other. Okay, that's just a reflection on how we typically communicate with each other on a regular basis. We don't listen. We just assert ourselves and our opinion over and against other people. So we interrupt, we get defensive, we take things personally, we get angry sometimes, and we just don't listen. We argue, we complain, we lecture, but we do not listen. So today we're going to be talking about listening. So listen up, which means those of you wearing hearing aids, make sure they're turned up. Physically and spiritually. Yeah, there you go. Turn up your hearing aid and listen to what God has to say. And I'd say that listening is an essential part of making peace. Part of making peace is having difficult conversations, listening to various perspectives, and working towards a resolution to that problem. But you cannot begin to bring peace if you're not willing to have a conversation and you're not willing to listen to what's going on and to analyze the facts and have a mature discussion about what's going on. So if we don't listen, we can't understand, and we can't move towards applying godly wisdom to everyday situations. So today we're going to be looking at a passage from James that should be familiar to all of us. James chapter 1, to begin laying the groundwork for how to listen, or the need for listening. And then from there, we're going to talk about some things that are some practical things that are going to help us listen better. And then we're going to look at a couple of case studies from the book of Acts to apply these skills of listening to some real life situations that have occurred. So in James chapter 1, the brother of Jesus and great leader of the church says, "Know this, my beloved brothers," and that's a command. Know this. You must know this. This is essential. "Let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. And he says this as a command. Every single person must do this. This is not some command or some optional thing, or this is not just some command for those who are spiritually mature. This isn't just a command for those who are leaders in the church. This isn't just a command for therapists or mediators trying to bring people together. This is a command for every single follower of Jesus Christ. That every single one of us are commanded to be quick to listen. To not follow our knee-jerk instinctual reaction to talk or to get angry about what somebody else is saying, but that we are quick, that our immediate reaction when somebody is talking, they're expressing themselves, they're giving their point of view in an area of conflict, that we shut our trap and we open our ears and listen to what they are saying. And I want us to take a special notice that he's saying, don't just be quick to listen, but slow to speak and slow to anger. There is a correlation there between not listening and talking and getting angry. That sometimes our anger, because we are angry, because we're frustrated, because we take things personally, when they're just expressing what's going on in their own lives, that we take it personally, we take offense to it, or we don't like what they say and we get angry. And so that makes our ears stop listening, and we allow our emotions to drive our reaction rather than taking a breath, distancing ourselves a little bit and listening to what they have to say. And also, I would say that sometimes when we're not listening or we're not fully paying attention, sometimes there's miscommunication, and that exasperates the problem, and it causes anger on both sides. People are getting frustrated because nobody understands what's going on. There's a breakdown in communication, and so the problem gets worse. So the opposite here of listening is speaking and getting angry. We've got to control those two things so that we can begin to listen. But the fundamental thing that is within this, the talking and the getting angry, is that sometimes we allow our selfish emotions to rob somebody of the opportunity to be heard. That if we are getting offended, we are getting angry, and we just want to say what's on our mind without letting somebody else express themselves fully, that we are being selfish and we're not allowing them to be fully understood and heard. So James is telling us that we basically need to be reacting in a way that we usually don't react. We need to listen first. Let the other person express themselves and explain themselves and express what's going on in their lives. But we normally want to put our opinion out there. We want to be heard. I am right, so you need to listen to me, okay? But we need to exercise self-control. We got to hold our tongue a little bit sometimes. We got to hold our tongue sometimes and shut our traps and listen to what the person is saying. But listening isn't just hearing. Now, I understand some of you have a hard enough time listening because some of y'all have some trouble like physically hearing. Or some of you are really good at tuning out your spouse. But you need to work on flexing those ear muscles and actually hearing what's being said to somebody. But listening isn't just the stimulus that is created by the audio waves hitting the bones in your eardrum and the electrical signals going in your brain. That's a physiological reaction. Listening is more than just that. Listening is understanding what the other person is saying. It's not just hearing, it's understanding. Not just what they're saying, but understanding the emotions behind what the person is saying and seeing the situation from that person's own perspective. It's not just enough to hear, but we've got to create understanding, and we have to see the issue from their perspective. And it works both ways. If there is a conflict, if there is an area for there to be peace made, we have to have both sides sit down and talk and explain things from their perspective. And from there, you can begin to create some common ground, and you see some areas where there is some connection. You can connect your experience with their experience, and you can have a little bit more compassion towards what they are going through. But you can never get to that step if you are not willing to understand what they are saying. So listening really has a lot to do with getting in somebody else's shoes and understanding things from their perspective. Now, I'm going to steal, I saw this illustration from another preacher, so I'm going to steal it, give them credit, because this is not something original to me. Some of you have bad eyes, so you won't be able to see this. What does this label say? Can anybody see it? Amanda, what does that label say?
Spring water, I'm guessing. Pure Aqua spring water.
Okay, that's the brand, right? But I don't see that. You're wrong, Amanda. That's what you say the label is. The label really says nutrition facts. Serving size is 8 ounces. This is bottled in Tempe Springs, Township, whatever, Pennsylvania. Distributed by Aldi. That's what the label says. What does the label say, Amanda?
Pure Aqua spring water.
No, it says if I take this to Maine or New York or Connecticut, I can get 5 cents for this bottle. Right? Now, who's right? Both of us are right. Okay? Why am I not seeing what she is seeing? Because I'm looking at the bottle the other side, right? But how many so in order for me to understand what she is seeing, I have to come down here and I have to say, I have to get close too. Oh, you're right, Amanda. Look what it says. Pure Aqua, BPA-free bottle. Awesome. We're not going to die of cancer from that bottle. That's great. But who knows that water came from Pennsylvania, so it's probably got some carcinogens in there anyway. Anything from Pennsylvania is bad, including the Steelers. But that is just a show. This is just a show. I'm going to die for that. That our perspective is not complete. That really to understand what somebody else is going through, understand what they are seeing, what they are experiencing, is we have to go around and we have to look at it from their perspective. And then we can have a conversation. Oh, you know what? The bottle says this and it says that. And we can come together and create a fuller picture of what is going on. So that is understanding. We have to listen to gain understanding about what the other person is going through, what their experiences are. And if you're just looking at the bottle from your perspective, you're never going to be able to see what somebody else is going through or what they're talking about. For example, there's a lot of white people who don't understand the concept of racism. They see these people complaining, oh, there's racism in the world, but they don't see it from the perspective of somebody who is experiencing racism. Or we might not see police brutality because the cops that we know and the police departments that we know are generally good. They're filled with God-honoring, good people. But other people live in areas where they have to deal with arrest quotas and racial profiling and strong police unions that say you have to have all of these results or else you don't have a job. Or stop and frisk, like in New York City. Or some people interact with some guys who are just on a power trip. But the people that we know, they're good people. So there's a difference in perspective. Sober people might not know the struggle of drug abuse because they don't see through the eyes of somebody who is ensnared in that disease or that addiction. We say things, well, why don't they just quit? Why don't they just decide today they don't want that drug or that alcohol anymore? Why don't they just stop it, right? Because we don't understand what they're going through. Or rich people might not know the trap of poverty because they don't see life through the lens of somebody who can't break out of the system. We say things like, well, they just need to pull themselves up from the bootstraps. But you know what? Poor people can't afford nice leather boots with the bootstraps. You know, I've priced some leather boots because I'd like to have a nice pair of leather boots. I ain't spending $150. No way, okay? My threshold for buying footwear is like $30, okay, and that's it. So poor people, they can't afford the boots with the bootstraps. They're walking around with sandals and flip-flops. Okay, that's just an illustration. Or we might think that a person is a jerk because they did something or they said something offensive to us. We don't know the pressures that they're facing from their job. We don't know the struggles that they're having in their marriage. We don't know the financial stresses, and all these things are coming together. And yes, they blew up that one day, but we don't realize the source of their anxiety. And so peacemaking requires us to listen to the story of others. And yes, there are going to be elements of that story that are going to shock us. Some things are, when they open their mouth and they say, this is what I'm struggling at, this is my perspective, it might make us angry at times. And we might cringe. We might not agree with what they are saying theologically. But it's the beginning of the conversation. It's not the end of the conversation. But when we listen, we build common ground, we can build bridges to what they are going through, and we can begin to work towards peace. So listening is important. But as I mentioned earlier, we have lost, that long silence probably made you uncomfortable because we don't like to be in silence. We don't listen, I think, because we have lost the skill of listening. Long, awkward pauses make us long and awkward. When in some cultures, when you're having a conversation with somebody and you say something like, I'm experiencing this, I'm going through this, I read the Bible and it said this, and the person you're talking to, there might be like a 10 or 15 second pause as they're formulating their thoughts. And then they respond to what you're saying. Our culture, we're just like so quick. But I think we need to perhaps revisit some of the fundamentals of communication because we have lost the art of communicating and talking and listening. You see it on the news, you see it on Facebook, you see it in how we talk to one another. Oftentimes it's just relaying stories. Oh, you've got a story. Oh, I got a story. And there's not a whole lot of communication. There's not as much depth going on there. And so I want to start off, and this is going to sound really elementary, and it might be insulting that we have to talk about how to communicate as adults. When, I'm 35 years old and I don't know how to communicate, that's a dumb... Joe, why are you saying I don't know how to communicate? Well, if I don't know how to communicate, I need to accept the fact. So I'm going to begin talking about some ways that we sometimes behave in conversations that keeps us from listening to other people. This list that I'm about to go through is from a website called Targeting Transformation. It's a Christian website for this ministry stuff, and they just provide this good resource. I'm not going to go through all 12 of the things, but I'm going to talk about some of the most important. These are things that when we're trying to listen, we're trying to communicate, these get in the way. And I think you'll understand these will probably hit home with you. And I think this is important. He says we need to be quick to listen. We need to learn how to listen. And these things get in the way. The first thing that gets in the way is mind reading. Whenever somebody is telling a story, they're expressing themselves, they're telling you what's going on or the issue that they have with you, that you're not paying attention to what that person is saying. What you're doing is you're reading between the lines, you're trying to figure out what the person is really thinking, or you're second-guessing their motivation. You're looking for subtle intonations and little cues that are going to cause you to verify your intuitions and the things that you're reading into it. In other words, mind reading is where you sometimes ascribe to somebody false motivations. Like, I know Bill said that to me because he hates me. No, Bill just said it because that's what Bill said, But sometimes we mind read, we add things to the story, we read between the lines, and there's nothing to read. Like our eyes are putting things that aren't there. Another thing that we do is we filter. If somebody is talking, we only pay attention for the information that is most important to us. And sometimes when we hear what we want to hear, our brain shuts off. How many husbands are guilty of that? Our filter is always off. Honey, I told you I didn't hear that. What are you talking about? Okay. But in conversation, we quit listening to somebody. We think, oh, this isn't a real serious thing, so we check out and we don't really listen to what they have to say. So we filter what they're saying, and we don't listen very well. Or sometimes we just listen for the nitpicky, critical things that we want to argue with. Another thing that happens in communication, instead of listening, is that we spar with other people. That instead of actually having a conversation, you just want to debate and argue. Sometimes I can be like that. Sometimes I'm up for a good debate, not for a good conversation. And so, having a conversation can be difficult. So the desire is to argue and debate, not actually talk. And so you focus on the things that you disagree about. Oh, well, you said the wrong word here. You should have said this word. Little nitpicky things like that. Or you start calling people names. Oh, you idiot. Oh, you disrespectful punk. Or, instead of actually listening, you push little buttons that that are going to irritate people. Or sometimes what gets in the way of communication is being right. Like, I am right, okay? You are wrong. So I'm going to tell you how wrong you are and how right I am. And so you have to protect yourself in that instance from being wrong. And so sometimes that then leads to sparring. Another thing that gets in the way is derailing, where you don't want to deal with what is being said, you don't want to deal with the tension, you don't want to accept the fact that you're wrong, and so you suddenly change the subjects. Like if I'm telling you, oh, this made me upset. Oh, you know what? How about that West Virginia game yesterday? Wasn't that awesome? Like, I was just telling you about this, and you're talking West Virginia? But we do that sometimes, don't we? Or the weather is so nice. Well, I'm just talking to you about this. I don't care about the weather. But you change the subject all of a sudden to avoid what's being said. Or some people placate, where you don't like the tension, you don't want there to be that disagreement, so you just agree with what the person is saying, you go along with what they say, so that the conversation just ends. Now sometimes when I'm tired and grouchy, that's what I do, which is not helpful. Okay, so those are some things that get in the way of communication. There's a longer list if you'd like for me to share it to you later. But they're just some things that we do fundamentally in conversation that completely derail our ability to listen. But we have to develop the skills and we have to develop the patience that we need in order to effectively listen and communicate and bridge understanding. And I know this is boring. Joe, you should be exegeting the text, Joe. Why are you giving me some practical ways of communication? Because we need the skills, okay? We need to build these practical skills. Okay, so instead of these ways that mess up conversation, how do we listen well? Well, the first thing we need to do is actually pay attention. Okay, let's practice. Everybody, there's somebody on stage talking. Apollos, pay attention. Let's practice right now, guys. Let's don't fall asleep. Okay. But you pay attention. You don't daydream about the West Virginia game. You don't daydream about what you're about to eat for lunch. You don't daydream about what you're going to do after the conversation is over. You listen to what they're saying. And then you show that you're listening with your posture. Like sometimes you might say, oh, okay. You nod your head. You do things to show that you're interested in paying attention, which actually you can do in church too. If somebody's up here talking and they're exegeting the text and they're trying to encourage you in the way of Jesus, your eyes can be open, right? And you can nod your head. And sometimes you can even say amen, because we're in church and you can say that, right? Hello? Babe, show me you're alive, people. It's okay. So just giving subtle cues that you're paying attention. And then, if you don't maybe quite understand what the person is saying, or maybe you think there might be a misunderstanding, you can ask questions to clarify. Oh, were you trying to say this? No, I wasn't trying to say this. Let me say it another way. Or was this the issue? Oh, yeah, that was the issue. You can ask questions to kind of clarify what is going on if you don't understand, or to show that are you saying that what Sarah said to you was upsetting? Yes, it was. Okay, I understand what's going on here. So asking clarifying questions. Another way of listening well is don't interrupt. Let the person not only finish their sentence, but finish their thought, their whole paragraph. Some of you extroverts, you can't handle for an introvert like me to keep rattling on with something. You have to interject, and I have to get my full thought out there, okay? Just let me say what I'm saying, and then you can talk, okay? This is the rule there. So, don't interrupt. Let the person finish not just their sentence, but their thought. Maybe there is a pause where they have to collect their thoughts. Suck it up and accept the pause. Don't be uncomfortable by the silence. Another thing is don't jump to conclusions. Don't think that you know what they're saying before they're done saying it. Sometimes I do that, and it's dumb, because sometimes my conclusions are wrong. Oh, you weren't really talking about that. Okay. So don't jump to conclusions. Let them get it all out there. And then be honest with your response. Like, you don't have to cover up your feelings. You don't have to try to make it like you don't feel what you're feeling. You can be honest and open about your reaction to the situation. Oh, I don't like that you just said that about me. That's hurtful. That's an honest response, and that's okay. And so a word just flew out of my brain. Come back, word, come back. The principle there is that conversations need to be truthful. We need to be open and honest about the things that we're saying and the things that we're feeling and the things that are going on in our brains so that we can effectively communicate. If we're lying or we're trying to season things so that it's not hurt their feelings when it's the truth, then that's not going to work. Okay, so anyhow. And the overall thing is we have to treat the other person with respect and dignity. Treat them the way that we want to be treated, which is with respect. We want people to listen to us. They want us to respect what we are saying. So we have to give the other person the same respect. So all of this is just to say that listening takes skills, it takes patience, and by the way, it takes practice, which sounds dumb if you're 35 or 60. Old people, you got to practice these skills. Yes, skills take practice, and it is okay. Now, when I was in college, we had to take a class on how to handle conflicts, and we had these weird little mats that walked you through the process of how to effectively communicate. And it was dumb and it was awkward, but we had to practice with our roommates. Okay, we have this conflict. Let's talk about it. Let's get out the mat. And you have to talk about your feelings and but we have to practice, okay? Okay, so it takes skill, it takes practice. We can't not communicate. We can't not listen. Okay, let's go ahead and do some case studies. Okay, we've talked about some fundamentals of communication, things that we may or may not be equipped with. Let's go and see how it worked in practice in the Bible. The first place that we're looking is in Acts chapter 6. This is an interesting story to look at. And these are our issues where there were disagreements, there was a lack of peace, there was some issue, some conflict that the church tried to resolve. And this is early on in the church life, so you can expect things are going to be sometimes awkward and there's going to be conflicts. So he says, Luke records, now in these days when the disciples were increasing in number, the church is getting bigger, a complaint by the Hellenists arose against the Hebrews because their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution. So there's this issue where there are some widows who are called the Hellenistic widows, or they are widows who were not born in Palestine. They are not born in Judea or around Jerusalem. They are born outside in different places throughout the Roman Empire. And they have moved back to Jerusalem because it was an honorable thing to die near Jerusalem, around where the temple was, around where family graves were and all that. So widows would leave their homeland, wherever they're born outside in the empire, and they would go back to their ancestral place and eventually die. And so they had different social circles, they had different synagogues that they went to. And so when you have these, okay, so that's one group. Then you have the other group who are the Hebrews, the Hebraic widows. These are people who are born around Judea, around Jerusalem. They have stayed in their ancestral areas. They speak, they're generally bilingual, speaking Greek and Aramaic because that's what they did in that region. But they had more Jewish feeling synagogues and practices. And they ran in different social circles. So at the beginning of the church, it's mostly Jews who were born in and around Jerusalem and Judea and Galilee, people of the Holy Land. And eventually you have Jews coming in from different parts of the empire coming to Jerusalem, and they become Christians. And so you have a conflict here between one group of widows who are in one social circle, they're being taken care of, and you have this other group of widows who are in different social circles, and they're being neglected. So when you examine this from the perspective of the Hebrews, the people who were born in and around Palestine, the thing says pure aqua. Everything is just fine. But then you have the widows over here who have migrated from different parts of the Roman Empire, and they say, this is bottled in Pennsylvania. This isn't good. We're not being taken care of. Okay? So they have this conflict, this issue. And so what do? Fast forward to verse 2. The 12 summoned the full number of the disciples and said, it is not right that we should give up preaching the word of God to serve tables. Therefore, brothers, pick out from among you 7 men of good repute, full of the Spirit and wisdom, whom we will appoint to this duty. But we will devote ourselves to prayer and to ministry of the word. And what they said pleased the whole gathering, and they chose Stephen, a man full of faith and the Holy Spirit, and Philip, and these are kind of Latinish names, so they're hard to pronounce, Prochorus, and Nicanor, and Timon, and Parmenas, and Nicolaus, and a proselyte of Antioch. These they set before the apostles, and they prayed and laid their hands on them. So how do they respond? Well, they listen to the experience of these Hellenistic widows. They don't say, oh, everything is fine. What are you talking about? There's no problem here. You know, they didn't do that. We do that sometimes. Oh, you guys, you don't have that problem. What are you talking about? Everything is just perfectly peachy and fun and happy because that's what I'm experiencing. And these ladies are over here, you know, things are not very good. Okay? But they listened. They listened to what they had to say. They understood the problem. Oh, these are from different social circles. So what we're going to do is we're going to find people in their social circles who have the resources and have the time to take care of them. Okay, we're going to make sure that there's some guys who are able to bring food to these widows. Problem solved. They didn't ignore the problem. They listened and they understood what was going on. Now, this could have blown up into some big racial argument or some ethnic argument, but no, they ironed it out and they listened and they did something about the problem. So they set aside their differences and they were able to talk about, oh, okay, you guys aren't having a good time. Okay, let's fix that. The next case study is in Acts chapter 15. This is a little bit more interesting. The church has been around for a while now, and at this point, not only are Hellenistic Jews from outside the empire becoming Christians, but now you have a lot of Gentiles becoming Christians. And they have all kinds of different cultural practices. They do not follow the law of Moses. And so that creates a conflict. Well, do these Gentiles who are coming to Christ, do they also have to follow the law of Moses? Because God had given this covenant to Moses. Are they still required to follow it? All of us Jewish Christians, we're still following it. Do these guys still have to follow it? And there were some that said no, and some that say, yes, absolutely they have to follow it. And there were people who were Pharisees who were still politically aligned with the party of the Pharisees, and they're saying, yes, absolutely, you must follow the law of Moses. And so what they do is they gather together all of the apostles and the elders of the church, and they have a conversation. They talk about this issue at great length. There's a debate that rises up. They're actually going to discuss this and figure out what's going on. Because this is a big theological thing. This is a huge undertaking. And from the Jewish perspective, you know, not following the law of Moses. This is something we grew up with. This is something our nation is supposed to have been following for over 1,000 years. And you just want them to not follow it? So this is huge. And so what they do is they get together and they talk about what had been going on in the Gentiles. They talk about how the Holy Spirit had been poured out among them. They talk about the miracles that have been done. They talk about how they are coming to Christ and being obedient to the gospel. And then they talk about, so Paul and Barnabas, as they're talking about all this stuff, Paul and Barnabas, they go down to Jerusalem and they gather all these people and they begin talking out of this conversation. Peter gets up and he describes how God has removed the distinction between Jew and Gentile. He's taken away that racial barrier, that dividing wall of hostility between Jew and Gentile. And we are now one people. Okay, so if they're one people, does that mean that we all have to follow the law of Moses now? But then he talks about how we are all saved by grace. They didn't earn salvation by following the Mosaic law. They were simply saved by grace, God's free gift of salvation. So they didn't get it by obeying the law, so why should they have to obey the law now? And by the way, nobody has ever been able to follow this law thing that we're saying that they have to follow. That's the whole point of Jesus coming. None of us can not sin, right? We all mess up at some point. We all need Jesus. And then James and Barnabas, they begin testifying again about all the awesome things that God was doing amongst the Gentiles and making it clear that God had accepted them fully without ever having to be circumcised or accepting the law of Moses. And then James reminds everybody about this prophecy that God would save Gentiles and they would become a part of his people. And then, beginning at verse 19. And this is James continuing to speak. He says, "Therefore, my judgment is that we should not trouble those of the Gentiles who turn to God. But we should write to them to abstain from things polluted by idols, and from sexual immorality, and from what has been strangled, and from blood. For from ancient generations Moses had in every city those who proclaim him, for he is read every Sabbath in the synagogues." So he is saying basically that as the synagogue, as the message of God has been proclaimed in the synagogues, that people in cultures around them have a basic understanding of what God requires. And one of the primary things is stay away from idols. There's one true God. All these other Roman gods, they are false. So they're saying we should tell these Gentiles to stay away from idolatry and stay away from sexual immorality. These are the two biggest issues that they're having in their culture. Stay away from these two things. I mean, you're talking about all the things in the law of Moses, all the sacrifices, all the rituals, and you're just saying only stay away from idolatry and sexual immorality. What about the 10 Commandments? Well, Jesus reiterated some of those, and Jesus reiterated some of the law, but those are moral things that are continued in his teaching. Okay, so he says stay away from idolatry and sexual immorality. And eating animals that were strangled meant that their blood was still in it, and that was related to cultic practices. If you drain the blood from a strangled animal, you're okay. If you drink blood, that was a bad thing because that was also part of cultic and idolatrous practices or magic or trying to extend your life by drinking the lifeblood of something else. So you basically stay away from idolatry and sexual immorality, and you're okay. Don't have to follow the law of Moses. But what you see in here is they had a discussion. There was disagreement, but they listened to the experience of the Gentiles. They listened to the experience of the Pharisees. But you also see that there was somebody who was wrong. The Pharisees were wrong. Sometimes we are wrong, and we have to accept the fact that, man, you're right. Ugh. Okay, as a result of the conversation, yeah, I'm an idiot. I'm wrong. Forgive me. That is sometimes how things work out. But they searched the scriptures. They applied godly wisdom to what was going on. And it was all based off of the grace of Christ, God's free gift of salvation to us all. And from that common ground, they were able to extrapolate how the grace of God applies to Gentiles. And so this idea of finding common ground helps us to listen better to other people. As Christians, we have a lot of common ground through Jesus. We have a lot of teachings that are common. We have a lot of truths that are common, and that should be our common ground. But when we're talking about each other and the conflicts that we have with each other, we have common ground in those disagreements as well, and we can use that to help bridge the gap of peace. And another interesting thing in this is that you see the elders and the apostles mediating a discussion. Sometimes when you are in conflict with somebody and you need to have a conversation with them, it is scary and it is intimidating. It is something that you do not want to have. However, you don't have to have the conversation alone. You can bring somebody alongside of you, especially a church leader, to have a conversation, to mediate that discussion. Somebody who's going to help bridge the gap of understanding and move the discussion towards a godly resolution. So don't be afraid or intimidated to bring along somebody else for the conversation if that is required. Having a neutral third party come alongside can be very beneficial to the discussion. But we've got to have difficult conversations. We have to talk about things. We have to try to resolve our conflicts in order to bring peace. And that requires listening. So as James reminded us, we need to be quick to listen and slow to speak. So of all the things I said, hopefully you have written down some ways, good ways of communication and all that. But what I want you to take away this morning is listen well. Hear what is said, but don't just hear. See the situation from the perspective of another person. Work towards a solution that is based off of our common ground in Christ. So listen and listen well so that you can help bring peace. Many of you have heard of a writer named Chuck Swindoll. He, in a book called Stress Fractures, relayed this story. And this is written from his perspective. He found himself with too many commitments in too few days. He had a lot on his plate. He was struggling with how to deal with it. He said, I was snapping at my wife and our children, choking down my food at meal times, and feeling irritated at those unexpected interruptions throughout the day. How many of us have been there? We've been stressed, we've been too busy, and we're just trying to get through it all as fast as we can. And he recalled in his book, Stress Fractures, before long, things around our home started reflecting the pattern of my hurry-up style. It was becoming unbearable. I distinctly remember after supper one evening the words of our younger daughter, Colleen. She wanted to tell me something important that had happened to her at school that day. And she began hurriedly, Daddy, I want to tell you something. And I'll tell you really fast. And suddenly realizing her frustration, I answered, Honey, you can tell me, and you don't have to tell me really fast. Say it slowly. He says, I'll never forget her answer. Then listen slowly. See, his issue is he was so focused on his schedule, so focused on getting things done, that he was not adequately listening to those around him. And he needed to take the time to slow down and listen. So as James tells us, let us slow down. And let us take time to listen well.